A nation that does not know God has invaded our Christian land. These people have destroyed the holy altars through their evil deeds. The blood of Christians is being thrown into fountains. These people cut down Christians and disgrace their women so much that I cannot say about it, even mentioning it is a sin. Better you yourself should know all that, and I will remain silent. Friends, these were the words that Catholic Pope Urban II spoke to a crowd in the French city of Clermont in November 1095. He wanted to prove to the people that the Muslims in the Middle East are severely oppressive to Christians, especially Christians living in Jerusalem, and European pilgrims are being treated very brutally. This is what he wanted to convey. However, this whole story was just propaganda. In the Middle East, and especially in Jerusalem, Christians were not being mistreated. As against what he was saying, Muslims and Christians were living there cordially. But this propagandistic speech of the Pope set fire all over Europe. In a short time, over 100,000 European men, women and children with the determination to snatch Jerusalem from Muslims left Europe. It was the beginning of a bloody war whose devastations kept their grip on the Middle East for 2 centuries. These battles begot such tragedies that their accounts cringe the people even today. History remembers these wars as the Crusades. But the question is, why did Pope Urban II start the Crusades? And how did the Crusades change the complexion of the Middle East? Fellows, the Crusades were founded in the Battle of Minzikert. In this war, the Seljuk Sultan Alp Arslan defeated the Eastern Roman Empire, i.e., the Byzantine Empire. After this battle in the next 20 years, the borders of the Seljuk Empire extended from Central Asia in the east to Constantinople in the west, near present-day Istanbul. In south, it extended to the border of Egypt, where the Fatimid Caliphate existed. Seljuks also controlled Beit al-Maqdis, while the Abbasid caliphs also kept their respectable existence under the patronage of the Seljuk. Given it, Constantinople city was the only wall between Europe and the Seljuks. Alexius Vivers, the Roman emperor in Constantinople, was quite concerned that if the flood of Seljuks was not stopped, the entire Eastern Roman Empire would end along with Constantinople. So he sent to Pope Urban II his representatives and asked him for help. Pope Urban II was already making efforts to bring Europe fully under the control of the Church, so he saw an opportunity in the appeal of Alexius I. The Pope thought if the Europeans are incited against the Muslims for waging a holy war, his authority in Europe would increase. Therefore, he pledged to support Alexius I. Then he visited France in 1095. Here in November, he chaired a religious gathering in the city of Clermont. At the end of the meeting, he announced that he wanted to speak to the general public personally. Now, look at the coincidence that Clermont is a city where some volcanoes also existed. It signifies the lava of the Crusades also erupted in the same city whose lap was already filled with natural fire. In his address, the Pope greatly aroused the emotions of the congregation against the Muslims. The words he said in the speech have been told you at the beginning of the video. But in addition to it, in the same address, he, along with seeking help for the Roman Empire, set a target for the Crusaders. He declared that the aim of their war is to take away Jerusalem from the Muslims. With this address, recruitment for the Crusades began in Europe. Let me also tell you here that the term Crusades was not given by the Pope. This term came about a century after the Crusades. Pope Urban II had named the Crusaders armed pilgrims. In other words, those who will go to occupy Beit al-Maqdis should not be called warriors, but they are going to their holy places. This means, as conquerors, they will visit those places. It was his dream and idea. The Pope also announced that those who, on his call, will go to fight will be absolved of all their sins, and they will be in heaven hereafter. The projection of the Pope and the good news of heaven began to be made throughout Europe. The Pope himself visited different places in France and began to gather troops. As per the plan, proceeding from Europe, the Crusader army would first reach Constantinople and from there take the Roman forces with it and across the Bosphorus attack the Seljuk Empire. Then, passing through present-day Turkey, they would travel along the Mediterranean coast and attack Jerusalem. So it was that at the end of the 11th century, the Pope and his supporters were enthusiastically recruiting for the war against the Muslims. In order to launch the Crusades, the Pope also fixed the date of August 15, 1096. On this date, all European armies had to turn to Constantinople to seize Jerusalem. But several months before that date, another man who was as charismatic as the Pope had already led his army there for war. He is known in history as Peter the Hermit. A hermit is a person who lives in solitude and separate from the world. His expedition is known in history as the People's Crusade. Who was this person? Peter the Hermit was a French priest. It was known about him that he went to Beit al-Maqdis, and alleged oppression of the Christians at the hand of the Muslims was witnessed by him personally. One day during his stay he was sleeping in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This church is located at the exact place where Jesus Christ was crucified according to Christian belief, and here, according to their faith, he was resurrected. So, while he was asleep, he dreamed that Jesus Christ was commanding him, "Go, Peter, and liberate Jerusalem from the Muslims." This dream was well publicized, but the historical record shows he never went to Jerusalem. However, his story was traditional and emotional. Through this story, Peter the Hermit got a large number of people around him. His followers were mostly poor people. They were about 20 to 30,000 in number. That is why this expedition is called the People's Crusade. Before the Pope, Peter the Hermit marched from France to Constantinople with a popular army. But on reaching Constantinople, this army did not wait to fight the Muslims. Before reaching Constantinople, they began a crusade against the Jews, the religious rivals of the Christians in Europe. In Germany, the supporters of Peter carried out mass murders of the Jews and decimated their localities. Many Jews were also forced to convert, and when this army reached Hungary here, it also carried out looting on a large scale. It also clashed with Hungarian army, which caused huge casualties on both sides, although the Hungarians were not Jews but Christians. But ironically, those fighting in the name of the cross were clashing with their own kith and kin. Ultimately, on July 1096, the remaining army reached Constantinople, that is, the Eastern Roman Empire, from where they were to cross over Bosphorus Strait, meaning that sea belt, after which the Seljuk area started where they were to enter. The people of Constantinople opened the city gates to Peter's army, but this army caused quite a stir here too. However, Peter and the Roman Emperor Alexius I ultimately met, whereafter peace was restored. Alexius I wanted to get rid of Peter and his pesky crusaders as soon as possible. He took Peter's army in boats across the Bosphorus Strait. Now, this army entered the Seljuk territory, i.e., Muslim territory. Let me also tell you here, friends, that by the time the soldiers of the People's Crusade entered the Seljuk areas, the vast Seljuk Empire had been divided into many small states. The Seljuk Empire in Turkey was called the Seljukian of Rum. Its capital was Nicaea, which now is called Iznik. The remains of the old city of Nicaea still exist. So the People's Crusade had the first encounter with the Seljuks of Rum, which was ruled by an 18-19-year-old Kilij Arslan. My curious fellows, Peter's army played the same game in the Seljuk Empire which they did in Europe. This means, here too, attacks, killing, loot, and plunder were carried out. The stories of their atrocities are heartbreaking. In short, these people cut down even children with swords and roasted bodies of many children on fire. The Crusaders had become so bold that even areas around the capital of the Seljuk Empire, Nicaea, was not spared of their vandalism. They also captured some small forts of the Seljuks. The Seljuk Turks could not remain silent on these aggressive actions. They surrounded many Crusader soldiers in a fortress east of Nicaea. The siege of the fort continued for 8 days. The Crusaders ran out of water. It goes that the Crusaders were so thirsty that they killed their horses and donkeys to quench their thirst with their blood. But obviously, this blood was not enough. When the animals died and no blood was left, resistance of the Crusaders also died. The Seljuk army entered the fort, and all the Crusaders were either killed or taken slaves. The rest of the Crusader army was in another fortress, Sivatot, located at a distance west of Nicaea. The leader of the Crusades, Peter the Hermit, had gone to Constantinople to seek military aid from the Roman Emperor, and when the men in the fort learned what Seljuks did to their comrades, they became anxious to take revenge. They planned an attack on the Seljuk capital Nicaea. On October 21st, 1096, they left for the attack without their leader Peter. But the Seljuks saw through their intention and beforehand took positions in the mountains between Nicaea and Sivatit. Under the command of their young king Kilij Arslan, they suddenly pounced and wiped out all Crusaders. After this, within 2.5 months, the People's Crusade came to an end. The Seljuk Muslims were victorious in this battle. The hero of the war was the young Sultan Kilij Arslan, who achieved a great victory at a young age. However, People's Crusade was only a trailer. These attackers were not well trained, hence were easily defeated. But following them were more organized and trained armies. and they were the very armies which were going to have actual crusades with the Muslims. My curious fellows, the European army formed with the efforts of Pope Urban II was about 100,000 in number. It had 35,000 foot soldiers, 7,000 knights means, cavalry, and add to it 20 to 60,000 workers and common people, including women and children. This army was also not gathered at one place in Europe, but in parts at different places in France, Germany, and Italy. Its commanders were elites from different countries in Europe. Among the famous commanders of the First Crusade included the French general Godfrey of Bouillon, his brother Baldwin of Boulogne, Robert II, son of William the Conqueror, the first Norman king of Britain, and Bohemond of Taranto, an Italian prince. These commanders had their own private armies which they brought along for the Crusades. Thousands of ordinary citizens also volunteered to become a part of this army. Although many European nations were included in this army, but in history, these people as a whole were called Frankish or Franks. This was because the Crusades started in France. France was named after the ancient kingdom of Francia, which at its peak was extended to Germany and Italy. Accordingly, the inhabitants of France were called Frankish or Franks. So, in this way, all the Crusaders were called Franks, and probably this term became known as Farangi in the Islamic world, i.e., Franks to Ferengi. At the end of 1096 EI, a few months after the date given by the Pope, the Crusader forces began to leave for Constantinople. All the chieftains of the First Crusade, from different places at different times, marched with their respective forces. Some joined the main army on the way, and others on reaching Constantinople got included in the central army. Pope Urban II himself did not go with this army, but he sent his representative, the Adhemar of Le Puy, with the army. This representative was a symbolic supreme commander of the First Crusade. However, despite his presence, all commanders were independent and made their decisions separately. Sometimes they had a consensus, and at times they would also squabble. However, this main Crusader army, including civilians, was around 100,000. By the end of 1097, the Crusader army gathered in Constantinople. By this time, the People's Crusade was over. Its leader, Peter the Hermit, was living somewhere in the Eastern Roman Empire. The people of Constantinople had faced violent attitude from the People's Crusade. Therefore, when this new Crusader army reached Constantinople, the citizens adopted a cautious attitude instead of showing any enthusiasm. The Crusaders were eager to enter Seljuk territory very soon and conquer Jerusalem. They got enraged by the cold attitude of the citizens. On some occasions, the matter reached near fight, but somehow it was averted. Alexius III not only transported the Crusaders to Seljuk territory by his ships, but also sent some of his army with them. At some point along the way, Peter the Hermit also joined this army. The first target of this Crusader army was Nicaea, the Seljuk capital. After that, their intention was to attack the city of Antioch while passing through Turkey. Only then they could advance towards Beit al-Maqdis. The attack on Nicaea was the actual beginning of the Crusade. But compared to the Crusaders, the Seljuk Empire was not yet fully prepared to face such a large army. This is why what happened next virtually jolted the Islamic world of the 11th century. My fellows, in early May 1097, the Crusaders began to advance towards Nicaea. Some of his troops along way also found decomposed bodies and bones of Crusaders killed in the People's Crusade. Seeing all this, they got more flared up against the Muslims. On May 14th, the Crusaders besieged the Seljuk capital of Nicaea. Friends, this city was located in an ideal location in terms of defense. It had a huge lake called Lake Esnek on its west. Due to this lake, the city on the western side could not be besieged. The city on its other three sides had a protective wall. This wall had 3 doors which opened in 3 directions. The guards closed all 3 gates and took up positions on the walls of the fort. When the Crusaders reached here, it encircled the city in front of these 3 gates. Now, friends, the city of Nicaea was although the capital of the Seljuk Empire, but a small army was deployed to protect it. After defeating the People's Crusade, the Seljuk Sultan Kilij Arslan assumed that the threat was over. So he somewhat ignored the defense of the city. So much so, when the city was besieged, he himself was not present in the city. He was far from the city, and when he learned of the enemy's arrival, he began to gather troops from other parts of his empire. After some time, he came out with an army and hid in the mountains near Nicaea. He wanted to attack the enemy from behind, but the Crusaders came to know of his arrival. So Arslan got ready for the fight. Kilij Arslan's army attacked the Crusaders from the south. Kilij Arslan was so confident of his victory that his soldiers, in order to tie up the Crusaders, has also brought along a large number of ropes. On the one hand, the Crusaders had already become alert, and on the other, the Sultan's army was also smaller than the enemy's. So he was defeated and was forced to retreat. After that, the Crusaders cut off the heads of the slain Seljuk soldiers and started to throw them inside the fort. Many heads were hung on spears and displayed in front of the fort. That means the Crusaders wanted the Turkish army present inside the fort to get frightened of them. You see, they succeeded therein too. The people inside the fort lost hope of any help from Kilij Arslan. Meanwhile, the Crusaders' ally, the Roman Empire, whose army joined them in the siege, made a clever move. The Romans brought many boats from the sea and through the land took them to the lake behind the city. The boats also blocked the city from the western side. The city was now under complete siege, besieged on all sides, and the guards of the city were seriously thinking to surrender. But they did not want to surrender to the Crusaders of Europe, for they believed that the Crusaders would sack the city and leave no one alive. So they secretly started talks with the commanders of the Roman Empire who had come from Constantinople with the Crusaders and who were also the representatives of the Roman Emperor. These commanders gave protection to men in the fort, and the city surrendered. Thus, the city was conquered in a month-long siege. But it was a quite peaceful surrender. The surrender angered the Crusaders much as they missed a chance to loot. However, the Roman commanders from the public treasures gave them a hefty amount and gifts to please them. The Seljuk capital was now in the hands of the Eastern Roman Empire. After some time, the Roman Empire, with the help of the Crusaders, captured a large part of Turkey from the Seljuks. Then, Seljuk ruler Kilij Arslan was getting ready for a decisive war with the enemy. But by the time he was ready, the enemy had advanced far into his empire. However, Kilij Arslan did make a last attempt. The outcome of this effort was the Battle of Dorylaeum. Sultan Kilij Arslan decided to use his most lethal weapon, i.e. cavalry archers. Turkish archers were known for their skill in shooting while mounted on horses. The famous Battle of Manzikert against the Romans in 1071 was also won by the Seljuks by virtue of these archers. Now, these cavalry archers were going to target the Crusaders. Whether they won the battle? On July 1st, 1097, a decisive battle took place between the Crusaders and the Seljuks. This battle took place at Dorylaeum, now located near Eskişehir, region of Turkey. It happened that the Crusaders were moving in different detachments. A few thousand Crusaders on foot were encamping at the place of Dorylaeum when the Turk Sultan with his cavalry fell upon them. The cavalry rained arrows and inflicted heavy casualties on the Crusaders. In no time, the Crusaders were surrounded in their camp, and the Turkish cavalry was showering arrows on them from all sides. It seemed that the defeat to the Crusaders was any time, but the same happened as it was earlier. That is, the number of Turkish cavalry was much less than the Crusader army. After a while, the rest of the Crusaders also began to arrive in the battlefield. Meanwhile, a part of the Crusader troops emerged from the rear of the Turks. When Kilij Arslan saw his cavalry was about to be surrounded, he became obliged to retreat with his army. The Crusaders had won the most important battle of Dorylaeum. After that, Kilij Arslan never attempted an open fight with the Crusaders and got busy managing his remaining kingdom. That is, the empire of the Seljuk Rum was there, but much more squeezed than it was before. As you can see on the map, the win of Dorylaeum opened the door to Syria and Palestine on the Crusaders. They advanced into Turkey and moved towards Syria. A Christian Armenian state, Silesia, was already in southeastern Turkey. This state also gave way to the Crusaders. Thus, this army advanced and reached outside the city of Antioch near the border of Turkey and Syria. Although this city was not a part of Kilij Arslan's empire, yet it was also under the control of the Seljuks. A Turkish rebel leader, Siyan, was its governor. He was under Fakhr al-Mulk Rizwan, the Seljuk ruler of the Syrian city of Aleppo. He refused to surrender to the Crusaders, and the Crusaders besieged the city. It was the start of a bloody and prolonged battle that brought the Crusaders to the brink of destruction. The Crusades might have failed at this point, but what happened the Crusades did not fail here. And what was special about this siege? My curious fellows, the defense of the city Antioch was quite strong. This fort-like city was built on top of two hills. The protective wall of the city went up to the top of the mountains. At the top was the main fort of the city, which was 1,650 feet higher than the rest of the city. From this height, it was easy to keep an eye on the city and the enemies around it. A river also flowed in the northwest of the city, which fell into the Mediterranean Sea. This river also served as a link of the people of the city with the outside world. Because of this excellent strategic location, the Turks dealt with the besieging Crusaders very well. Whenever the enemy was caught napping, the Turkish soldiers would ride out of the city on their horses and escape after showing arrows from close range. If a Crusader fell into their hands, they would take him into the city, torture him to death, cut off his head and throw it outside the Crusader camp. Western historians say the Turks also captured the chief priest of the city. They would hang him upside down on the wall of the fort every day and hit his feet with sticks. The Crusaders from remote watched this scene and boiled in fury for revenge. Meanwhile, the Seljuks from Aleppo and Damascus also came to the aid of the city, but the Crusaders routed them. Following it, they tightened the siege of the city. The Crusaders also captured a Turkish fort near the sea. In this way, Antioch was cut off from the sea through the river. On the other hand, a new supply line opened for the Crusaders, and they began to get supplies from the sea. But even this help proved insufficient, and the Crusaders failed to conquer the fort. When the siege prolonged for months and no victory was in sight, the Crusaders began to flee. Their commanders began to fight among themselves. Despite supplies from the sea route, the army ran severely short of food. Many soldiers died of hunger and disease. The winter of 1097 was especially doomsday for the Crusaders. Their animals also started dying due to a lack of fodder in winter. In this situation, the priests in the army pronounced that the army was facing troubles because of the sins of the soldiers. So, all the women in the Crusader camp were separated from men as if they were the only cause of sins. Apart from this, the soldiers were also ordered to fast, give charity, and perform other acts of worship. If a soldier was caught with a woman, both were stripped naked with their hands tied up. Then they were taken around the whole camp being beaten with sticks. Eventually, the summer of 1098 set in, but neither the Crusaders lifted the siege nor the Turks surrendered. Friends, no idea how long this siege would last until suddenly the Crusaders got help from a traitor from Antioch. It was a person named Feroz, about whom not much information is available. Historians believe that he was an Armenian Christian who had converted to Islam. He was also among the city guards and was well familiar with security matters and arrangements. For some reason, he turned rival to the governor of the city, Yaghi. He somehow contacted the Crusaders to take revenge and offered to help them capture the city. In return, the Crusaders promised to give him wealth. Thus, a deal was reached between the two. But in the meantime, the Crusaders received an alarming news. It was that Karboga, the Turkish ruler of Mosul, with about 30,000 soldiers, was coming to help the Muslims of Antioch. It was fairly a large army. The armies that came earlier from Damascus and Aleppo were easily defeated by the Crusaders because they were small armies. But this army was larger than what they expected. Then, the Crusaders, already sick of the prolonged siege, found it hard to face the fresh army. So, an attack by the Karboga's army and open action by the city guards might have crushed the Crusader army. This situation was an alarm bell for the Crusaders. So, in any case, before Karboga could come, they had to conquer Antioch. It had become a matter of life and death for them. So, the Crusaders immediately contacted Feroz. Feroz told them about a part of the wall where security was short or was to be inadequate on that day. On the night between June 2nd and 3, a group of 50 or 60 Crusaders climbed this part of the wall with the help of ladders and ropes. Here they eliminated the guards and opened a city gate. Instantly, a large army of the Crusaders already stationed outside entered the city through this gate and started waving Crusader flags on the walls. The Turks got much upset and confused when saw the Crusader flags on the walls. Meanwhile, the Armenian Christians in the city also started to open the remaining gates of the city. Soon, the entire Crusader army entered the city through these gates. After that, the massacre started. Without recking age and sex, the Crusaders began to kill the Muslims brutally. In some places, the Muslims resisted, but the Crusaders soon overpowered them. As it was night, some Christian residents were also killed. The streets of the city were littered with corpses. It goes that no one could go through the streets without stepping on dead bodies. There were so many dead bodies. The governor of the city, Yaghi, tried to escape on a horse. He had even come out of the city, but after some distance, he fell from the horse and became unconscious. His companions left him for dead. After some time, an Armenian butcher found Yaghi wounded. He chopped off his head and presented it to the Crusaders. Thus, Yaghi, who resisted the Crusaders for about 8 months, met a tragic end. On June 3rd, Antioch fell to the Crusaders. Just a day after the Crusaders' victory, on June 4th, Carboga's army arrived outside the city. With a gap of only one day, the Muslims missed a sure victory over the Crusaders. Now, Carboga did not have a city before him but a city of graves. Rather, it was a city of the dead, whose inhabitants had gone into eternal sleep. Carboga besieged the city, after which the Crusaders got besieged in the city. Friends, the victory of Antioch was no less than a miracle for the Crusaders. According to them, nature had helped them, and through the source of Feroz, it made them victorious. Many soldiers were seeing holy figures in their dreams, giving them the good news of victory ahead. A priest even claimed to have found in Antioch the sacred spear that had been pierced into Christ's body at the time of his crucifixion. With all that, the morale of the Crusaders became unusually high. On the 28th of June, they left the city and made a surprise attack on the Turkish army. A large part of the Muslim army did not even get a chance to be stable, while Carboga had a majority of soldiers whose loyalties were doubtful, so they fled. Thus, Carboga was badly defeated. After this defeat, Carboga escaped and came to Mosul. Now the Crusaders had no mood to go back. They entered Syria and marched towards Jerusalem, conquering one city after another. On the way, Tripoli, a Muslim city in Lebanon, surrendered to the Crusaders. The capital of Libya is also after this name, but here it is not that city. The ruler of this city also deputed a guide to help Crusaders reach Jerusalem. Apart from Tripoli, some other cities also surrendered. Some others were captured with swords. During this time, atrocities also continued. In the Syrian city of Me'arat al-Numan, many Crusaders even ate the flesh of killed Muslims to satisfy their hunger. It was such a shocking event that even the great Crusader leaders could not believe it. So, friends, with all this, the Crusaders continued to advance, and their successes had no halt. They were moving like locusts towards Beit al-Maqdis, which was their main target. But by then, a difference had come about. Taking weakness of the Seljuks to advantage, the Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt took over Beit al-Maqdis. The Crusaders now did not have to fight the Seljuk for Beit al-Maqdis but the Fatimids of Egypt. So, friends, when the Crusader army reached outside Jerusalem, who helped them from the inside? The Fatimids, in order to keep the Crusader army away from Beit al-Maqdis, adopted a war strategy. What was that? The water of wells was poisoned and the Crusaders had a shortage of water, so how the siege of Beit al-Maqdis was made in this situation? You will see it in next episode of History of Crusades and Salah al-Din Ayyubi.